ours and are not necessarily those of KKNW, its management, or other advertisers. This program is sponsored by Dr. Pat Basili and Transformation Talk Radio.
The vibration of change, that magical place where life shifts from struggle to ease, from stagnation to forward movement, from old ways of being to new ways of becoming. If you're like I am, it can be rather elusive to get there, but when you are in it, you feel it down to your very core, don't you? And it can positively affect everything in your life, from your relationships to your health and well-being, from your career path to your abundance, from the quality of that inner connection to the fullness of your self-expression. On the Christine Upchurch Show, we explore ways to get into that vibration of change with experts in the fields of consciousness, psychology, spirituality, health, healing, and science. Join me, Christine Upchurch, every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on KKNW AM 1150 and Transformation Talk Radio, and learn new ways to step into your vibration of change. Welcome to the Christine Upchurch Show here live on KKNW AM 1150 in the Seattle area, Transformation Talk Radio around the world, and also on Facebook Live. If you go to the Transformation Talk Radio Facebook page, you'll be able to watch this live, video and all. You might be listening after the fact on christineupchurch.com or one of the dozens of podcasts it sends up. But wherever and whenever you're joining us here, we're very grateful to have you, and I think you're going to be grateful too, because we are going to be talking about something that in all the years of this show we've never talked about before, and that's about the specifics of alchemy, as well as how that relates to what's going on right now. But before we get into that, I want to say hello to the people behind the technology. Olivia, are you there on TTR?
I am. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for doing your part of this technological, magic. And Mr. Benny Mathers, I miss being in the studio with you, Benny. Hey.
Hey, what's up? And of course, we miss you deeply here. You'll be back. Don't worry.
Oh, yes. Yes, I will. And I am happily moving along in quarantine, so to speak. I had a class this weekend that I was attending.
That's good.
It's a mosaics mirror class. It's mandala one, and I love the classes that Angie Heinrich, Zetamari, that she puts on, and they've gotten changed to online classes. So anyway, our world is a different place. I'm very fortunate to be, home doing my thing as I normally do. How about you, Benny? How are things going at your end?
Same here. Nothing's really changed. We got a lot of homework we're still kind of catching up with. I don't really have much more to report. It seems like the Groundhog Day, just kind of going in, going out, doing it again.
Yeah. And, I think that what's become clear to most people on our planet right now is that things have changed, and we won't ever be able to go back to the new norm, to normal. There will be a new normal. And yes, it may become very safe again to go out to public places and to give people hugs and shake people's hands. Maybe not. But our world is changing. And our guest today is going to be talking about that. She's going to be talking about the physics of biology and sort of consciousness aspects of alchemy, and how that relates to what's going on. But before I introduce her, we're going to take a real quick break, 60-second break, to make sure that all the technology is in alignment, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
No matter where you are in the dance of life.
The vibration of change, that magical place where life shifts from struggle to ease, from stagnation to forward movement, from old ways of being to new ways of becoming. If you're like I am, it can be rather elusive to get there, but when you are in it, you feel it down to your very core, don't you? And it can positively affect everything in your life, from your relationships to your health and well-being, from your career path to your abundance, from the quality of that inner connection to the fullness of your self-expression. On the Christine Upchurch Show, we explore ways to get into that vibration of change with experts in the fields of consciousness, psychology, spirituality, health, healing, and science. Join me, Christine Upchurch, every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on KKNW AM 1150 and Transformation Talk Radio, and learn new ways to step into your vibration of change.
Won't ever be.
Welcome back. That was just a little bit of Michael Tomlinson. He's an amazing musician. Go to michaeltomlinson.com. Today we're going to be talking to Dr. Theresa Bullard. Now, she's got an interesting background and career path. She is a PhD physicist. Now, my son is a physics major right now in college, and I have great respect for people who get PhDs in physics. She's also the host of Mystery Teachings on Gaia TV, and she's an international spiritual teacher with the Modern Mystery School. She merges science, ancient wisdom, and powerful time-tested techniques for harnessing consciousness. I love this bridging of science and spirituality. And she brings a new approach, and we're very grateful to have her here today. She's also the author of The Game Changers, Social Alchemists of the 21st Century. And we're going to be talking a lot about alchemy. I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Theresa Bullard. Hi, Theresa.
Thank you. It's great to be on here.
You know, when I've heard about alchemy in the past, it was this mystery thing of a bygone era where supposedly people were turning, regular metals into gold, this concept of water into wine. And it seemed like something that to many is just unattainable. But you have a very different perspective on alchemy, and I didn't realize there was science behind it. What is it about physics and spirituality that makes you want to talk about alchemy?
Yeah, well, when I first came into reading about alchemy and studying it, I was in the same position you were in. My original idea of it was just this, it's this pseudoscience trying to turn lead into gold, and it was, from the Middle Ages and that kind of thing. But it kept coming up as I was searching I was in graduate school actually at the University of Washington getting my PhD at that time. And I really realized at some point in my life how important spirituality was to me, to have a sense of balance and meaning and purpose to it all. So I was really searching for, okay, I've got this science background, and I know that spirituality is personally important to me for my well-being, but how do I find spirituality that bridges and complements the science? And, is there a way to weave them together? And I had gotten really inspired by, the quantum physics and how it overlaps with some Eastern philosophies, for example. But I found that it was all very theoretical, very conceptual, very philosophical, and not very applied. So I had gotten to this point where I was really looking for, how can we bring this down to earth? How can we make it practical in our lives? And yet still have, take it deeper rather than just sort of these concepts of parallels. Like, how can we really bridge science and spirituality in a deeper way? And that was when alchemy started to show up for me in my life, and through different synchronicities. And when I started to read about it, I realized alchemy isn't what we were taught at all. That I realized that it was this wealth of wisdom about our personal transformation first and foremost. And it's really, alchemy is where science came from originally. So physics, chemistry, modern medicine, modern pharmacology, even psychology, like a lot of our modern day sciences were born out of the tradition of alchemy. And there was a point where the spiritual side of alchemy and the scientific side of alchemy split. But I don't think that was because they weren't compatible. I think that was more because of there was politics involved, there was religion that got involved, there was money that got involved. There's all these other reasons for why those two factors split out. But originally they come from the same source. And so as I was reading about it, I realized, like, wait a second, this is natural science. The alchemy is just the study of nature and the evolutionary process of nature and how things evolve from a lesser state to a greater state, and how we can work with that, how we can participate with that to speed it up. And first and foremost, though, it's about us. It's about our transformation. So there's some really fascinating things when you kind of let go of the bias that science really created around the history of science, and they tried to divorce themselves from alchemy. And there might have been, there were charlatans, but there are in every field, and we see that today as well.
Science too, yes.
Yeah. And so they kind of threw the baby out with bathwater, I feel. And so when it comes to both knowing ourselves and our own personal transformational process, I personally saw a lot of reflection as I read about alchemy more and thought, oh, wow, this really applies. And this applies at so many levels to the transformational journey, to self-growth, but also to evolution. It's a natural formula. It shows up all over, and we just need to understand it so that we can learn how to work with it again and be more conscious of that process. And ultimately, the alchemy is about us becoming our greatest self. But we can also apply it in the world.
And I love the fact that you not only bring it to the individual, but you're also focusing on the social collective, which I think is so front and center right now. The timing of the show is perfect. But first, before we get into how this relates to us individually and collectively, can you just share the various steps of alchemy, which was mind-opening for me because I had never heard of these steps.
Yeah, so alchemy, the steps of alchemy can be broken down in different ways, but the first thing we can look at is there's what we call 3 phases. And they use colors, right? So alchemy's language is very metaphorical. So they talk about the black phase, the white phase, and the red phase. And these are, so the black phase is where there's impurities, there's distortions, there's things that are corrupt and not working, and they need to be weeded out. And then, and there's several steps to get through that first phase. There's about 5 steps just getting through that first phase of purifying, basically.
Right.
And then there's the white phase, which is, okay, now we've purified, but now we need to refine, we need to raise the vibration. And then there's the red phase, which is, okay, now everything is perfected, we need to crystallize this new state. So within those 3 phases, we can break it down into 7 steps. So the first 5 steps are all within the black phase. Then there's the last 2 steps, which are in the white and then the red phase. Mm-hmm. And so these 7 steps are, the first one is what we call calcination. And calcination is like the breaking down. It's this, it's a shakeup, it's like you're taking the old form, you're destroying it, it's a death, but it's rather shocking to us when it happens. And so, on one hand, we could say, the whole, like 9/11 was a calcination experience, where it was just shocking wake up to the whole world.
Yeah.
And we had, many times in our personal lives, we have and this could be one of those moments for a lot of people where it's like your whole life just gets turned upside down. Your foundation gets ripped out from under you. You have a trauma, you have a loss of some kind. It's very disruptive to your life. That is a calcination process. And
so can you give us an example in the physical realm of science, like in the laboratory?
What it means, yeah. So to calcinate something is basically to burn it down to ash. So in alchemy, we might take, if we work with herbs, for example, we would gather the herbs from nature. We would let them die. Basically, you dry them out.
Sure.
And then you take those dried leaves, you put them in a mortar and pestle, you ground them down to, you just pulverize them and destroy the old form. And then you might light it on fire to burn it down to ash.
Okay.
So it's a very intense kind of process that we would go through physically to do the calcination stages. And then for us, what that can often bring up, it's a lot of upset and disruption and anger and, all of, all confusion and so forth. And, or your ego gets burned in some way and it reacts to that, right, in an extreme way usually. So then the second stage is dissolution. So in dissolution, physically what it means is you would now take that ash from the previous stage, and you put it into water, and you stir it up and you dissolve it. And so in a metaphorical sense and in a personal sense, it's when we start, all the stuff from the subconscious starts to stir, our emotions start to stir from the previous upset, and we get, it's murky, it's confusing, it's emotional, it's hard to make sense of what's going on, and you might be moved to tears about it, and so forth. So it's again kind of an unsettling kind of process that we might go through. But it's more emotional versus egoic. I mean, it's the deeper parts of the subconscious rising up to be seen, to be made in touch with, so that we can start the purification of what's going on at a deeper level. So it's purifying, and the water and energy kind of cools the burn in a way. And
yes.
You know that you've reached the end of a disillusion stage when you've kind of cried the tears and there's not really any more tears to cry. And you feel a little more like, okay, I've let go of this emotional energy. Now I can start to think more clearly again. So then we go into separation. And in the laboratory process, once you've had that solution where everything's dissolved in water, you just basically would like sit it on a countertop and let it sit there for a while. And if you've ever drinking loose leaf tea, and you've steeped the tea and you have the leaves inside the tea, and sometimes when you just let it sit there for a bit, the tea leaves sink to the bottom, and you get the colored water in the middle, and then sometimes you'll get this little oily film on the top. This is an example of the separation stage. So in separation, you have like the different densities start to separate out. The heavy stuff sinks to the bottom and the light stuff rises to the top.
So you actually get to see visually, and you could probably taste it as well, the differences between the elements within it, the parts of the whole.
Yeah. So we call this in alchemy, we call this separating out the three essentials. So there's different essential ingredients or essences that are contained within the original leaves, for example, of the tea before they were steeped. There's all the essences are bound up in there. And through the steeping process, or that dissolution process, you are separating out, you're extracting some of those essences out of the leaves. And then that's, why we get the benefits of it. So without having to eat the leaves, you get the benefits of what was extracted from it. So this is what the separation process does. And so for us personally, and in our, if we look at it socially, we're now able to think more clearly again. We're able to see through some of the confusion of all the emotional stages before, and we start to separate out what's true, what's not true, what's of essence to keep here, what is distorted or what is corrupted that we need to discard. Who am I? Like, what do I really want to what do I need to learn from this experience? Like, how is this trying to help me grow, right? And so we start really asking a lot of questions and trying to assess what's what, and pick the pieces out that we need to keep and what we need to throw away.
And it sounds like it's the stage where you begin to get clarity.
You do, yeah. You begin to get clarity. The mind comes in more. If we were to assign an element to it, it would be more air. So, first we had fire, then water, and then separation is more air, where it's mind, and the air represents the mind and our thoughts. And so it is about trying to get that discernment coming in and really get the clarity of what decisions to make, how to change our behaviors, right? And I see that that's happening here right now as well. And what do we want to do moving forward? Like, how are we going to move into a better way of life after we come out of all of this upset and disruption? And so as we start to pick out the pieces of what we want to keep, we separate them. So we would kind of, but you separate them into three separate piles in a way. So like if we took the example of the tea, you would sort of spoon off the little bit of oily film on the top and you put that in a separate vial. Then you would run the rest of it through a filter, and the liquid would go into the cup, but then you have the tea leaves sort of kept in the filter. So that's three separate components that now get they could be taken through further purification processes separately. So we separate out the different essentials. We don't discard anything yet. We just sort of, send them through more purification because we want to extract as much of the essential ingredients as we can.
Okay.
So then once you've purified all those ingredients on a separate basis, at some point you want to bring everything back together. So the next stage, which is the fourth stage, is conjunction. And you're now bringing the different purified ingredients, essential ingredients that we want to keep, back together into a whole mixture. And so, you could think of, in physical alchemy, you could think of herbal remedies, right? So herbal remedies are taking, especially if it's in tincture form, they've extracted the essence. They've maybe gone and taken the dead leaves or whatnot, and they've taken it through further purification.
Right.
And then they've got the essential oil. They've got the sort of alcohol extraction of the essences or water, and then when you do conjunction, you bring all those different components back together in a really high potency formula. So it's different from a tea. It's a much higher.
What I find so fascinating about this is that the separation of the parts is a really important part of the transformation into a more powerful whole.
Yeah. In fact, there's a motto or a formula. The basic formula of alchemy is in Latin. It says "salve et coagula," which means separate and recombine. So we separate, and then eventually we're going to recombine. But you have to separate in order to purify and to refine. And then when you bring them all back together, now we've eliminated all the impurities and we bring all the essential ingredients back together, but in a more integral form. And so the recombining is where the potency comes in and where the real transformation starts to happen.
And I think about somebody who's gone through some deep inner work where they start to see, oh, I've got this wounded child that's been misbehaving, and I've got this control freak that, relates to this other traumatic situation. And you see the different parts of yourself. And then at some point you develop compassion and you begin to integrate them all back together. And through this awareness of that they're all there and they're all acceptable, but I'm going to be putting this together in a way where they're not allowed to bring forth the worst aspects of themselves, but rather the best aspects of who they are.
Right. Yeah. So if we were looking at our personal growth, there's always the gift within the shadow, right?
Yes.
So if you go into that shadow side, maybe the wounded child, right? We realize that wounded child just needed love. So now we recognize, oh, well, I can love that part of myself and I can give that. And then that inner child no longer feels so wounded once we give ourselves enough love that it grows and matures. So it's no longer stuck in that old wounded child. And with the controller, it was like, I need to feel safe maybe. And so, why do I need to feel safe? And then that goes back to kind of the same kind of issues, right?
Yes.
And so we assess, where's the essence of what this part of me needs to bring forward to heal and then to reintegrate back in.
Right.
And so, as we bring them all back together through acceptance and compassion and love, like you said, that brings us to the conjunction phase, which is where everything comes back together in a more whole, integrated, strengthened, we will feel more confident. We will feel more in touch with ourselves. We'll have reclaimed aspects of ourselves and so forth. And the conjunction phase is very beautiful. It reminds us of who we are. It reminds us of some of our gifts that we kind of, when we shut that inner child away, we shut away some of the gifts that came with it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think that there's a whole segment of the New Age movement and consciousness movement where people hope to just transcend those pieces as opposed to integrating them into the whole.
Yeah, we call that spiritual bypassing.
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's not going to work, because that as long as they're still stuck there in the subconscious, at some point, no matter how much you know, no matter how well you can meditate, no matter how much bliss you can feel, you're still going to have that shadow side sitting there waiting for you to give it attention to heal it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it'll come up at some point and kind of sabotage all that other higher energy stuff if you don't deal with your foundation.
What's the last step within the black phase, I think is what you call it?
Yeah, so the very last step within the black phase is what we call fermentation. So you have to think, so from conjunction to fermentation, in conjunction, we've got this, okay, this new self is emerging again. I'm reclaiming parts of me and my true self. Things are coming back together, feeling really good, but it's a fledgling state and it needs to mature. And so, kind of like a baby needs to grow up. Right. That part of us needs to mature and be strengthened. So we'll go back out into life. We will feel challenged by the same issues that we used to be challenged by, and it'll test us to see how much have I really healed, or have I sort of glossed over some things. And so then as we move into the fermentation, it's that testing period to mature us. In alchemy, we would say to ferment something is to basically take that herbal mixture, let's say, and it's not perfected still. And so we're gonna, there's still some subtle impurities in it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it in a dark kind of space, and put a low heat on it and let it ferment. You're gonna let the impurities rot, and any part that is still corruptible will rot and it'll die away. But it's a longer, slower process. And you're in the dark usually, so you don't really know how long it just takes patience. It takes surrender. It takes really letting go of some of the more subtle attachments that are harder often, because we might convince ourselves that those were good things. We sometimes at a personal level, it's like we will realize that not only did we have attachments to personality was not serving us, old issues and so forth, but we also had attachment to personality techniques that we thought were serving us, and maybe they served us to a point, but they were actually coping strategies that were masking other things. We have attachments to good things
and situations and people and so on and so forth.
And so our identity is wrapped up in those old things.
Absolutely.
It's hard to let go of for people.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to get to the last couple of stages of alchemy and see how that relates to you personally and what that has to do with what's going on in our world right now. Stay tuned for more with Dr. Theresa Bullard here on the Christine Upchurch Show in just a few moments.
There you are in the dance of life. No matter what you dream.
I'm Peggy Snow with another Stellar Reflections Minute. Presence, or what we think of as being fully in the moment, is a key element in the process of healing work. As a practitioner facilitating a session, genuine presence takes us out of our heads, where we tend to decide what is and maybe what should be for the client, and moves us into direct experience where we're available to witness the person in their wholeness. In this receptive realm, our senses are heightened and expanded, allowing us to perceive what's seeking to unfold and to interact in the moment. There's something profoundly powerful that happens when healing is approached in this simple, pure way. Balance can be restored and healing can take place on multiple levels. If you'd like more information about the services we offer at Stellar Reflections, visit us at stellarreflections.com or call 425-999-9836. That's 425-999-9836.
This is Debbie Pokornik with a break-free parenting tip. Parenting will always be a bit of a mystery. Who knows why some parenting ideas work and others do not? Or why some kids seem to succeed despite family setbacks, while others have so much given to them and yet fail to thrive. The one thing we do know is that once you have a child, you'll never be quite the same again. Awe-inspiring emotions like overwhelming love, extreme guilt, intense frustration, and incredible joy make this job second to none. Breaking free of parenting pressures means recognizing the pieces that make us unique, the pieces that we carry with us from the past, and the pieces that are influenced by the society we live in. When we can pick and choose which pieces we want to keep around and change the others to align with our inner wisdom, we will feel more self-assured in our role as a parent.
For information and to work with Debbie, visit empoweringnrg.com.
The vibration of change, that magical place where life shifts from struggle to ease, from stagnation to forward movement, from old ways of being to new ways of becoming. If you're like I am, it can be rather elusive to get there, but when you are in it, you feel it down to your very core, don't you? And it can positively affect everything in your life, from your relationships to your health and well-being, from your career path to your abundance, from the quality of that inner connection to the fullness of your self-expression. On the Christine Upchurch Show, we explore ways to get into that vibration of change with experts in the fields of consciousness, psychology, spirituality, health, healing, and science. Join me, Christine Upchurch, every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on KKNW AM 1150 and Transformation Talk Radio, and learn new ways to step into your vibration of change.
Are you meeting your sales goals? Or maybe your business plan could use a dose of the divine? Tune in to Divinely Driven Results with faith-based business coach Elise Smith on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Coach Elise Smith helps listeners get unstuck from their business plateau and become empowered through divine guidance. Build up belief in yourself and your dreams, and learn business strategies that work for you for real lasting results. Learn more by visiting www.divinelydrivenresults.com.
Free. We have not been the same since you came, and we won't ever be.
Welcome back to the Christine Upchurch Show here on KKNW, AM 1150 in the Seattle area, and Transformation Talk Radio around the world. I do want to mention that if you're interested in watching this live, you can watch it on Facebook. Go to the Transformation Talk Radio Facebook page, and you'll be able to see my guest, Dr. Theresa Bullard, and myself having our conversation. And and let us know what you think of the conversation. I think it's a fascinating conversation. Dr. Theresa Bullard is a PhD physicist who's also a spiritual teacher. And she has her own TV show, and she's the author of Social Alchemists in the 21st Century. Theresa, okay, so you talked about there being 3 overall phases of alchemy, and the first one was the black phase, and there were 5 steps within that. And you were just about to go from that black phase to the white phase. What is that, both physically and sort of, psychologically, spiritually?
Mm-hmm. So that final step of the black phase is really like the death of the old personality, the death of the old identity.
That fermentation that you were talking about. Yeah.
And sometimes we call it a dark night of the soul because we attach so much to that old identity that it's hard to let it go, really let it go and really surrender. But in ancient traditions, when they were doing this process, like the initiate, they would be going through an initiation process. And during that fermentation, for example, they would go out into the desert for their vision quest, or they go into the cave for 40 days and nights. And, they'd fast, they'd meditate, they'd, pray, they do some qigong, they would do this process it's creating internal alchemy. And at some point it would create a vision within them. And they would have this vision of light. They would have a vision of, maybe the gods and the goddesses, who knows, but their vision would be like of their own divinity. Ultimately, they would see, I am not this identity. I'm not this personality. I'm not even this body. And they would have this awakening to rising beyond that and recognizing that their true essence is eternal. And so that's the shift. That when you have that vision in physical alchemy, when there's a fermentation process going on, they know that the fermentation is complete, that all the old corruptible parts are dead when there's this like rainbowy or golden film that forms on the top of the ferment, and they call that the peacock's tail, or the golden sort of wax. And so there's a physical signal that will happen to mark, okay, now everything that is left is of our pure eternal essence, and now we just need to refine it and perfect it.
Interesting.
And that's when we move into the sixth stage, which is called distillation.
Okay, and this is the white phase that you referred to
This is the
before?
white phase, yeah.
Okay.
So we kind of have this little transition point. Sometimes they call it the yellow phase, where you transition from the black to the white. And as you go into the white phase, it's just, okay, everything that's left is pure. It's what we want to keep. It's now we just need to distill, to raise the vibration, to integrate, to mature or refine and so forth. So we would take that, and now we go through, I'll explain the physical part. So if you would take what's left from the fermentation, and you now put it into, you dissolve it in water again, or some kind of solvent again. You put it into a distillation apparatus from chemistry, and you would put a heat underneath it. And as the water, the liquid warms up, it starts to evaporate, right? So vapors start coming up, and the parts that are the most volatile or the lightest would evaporate first. So like the essential oils, for example, would evaporate out first, and then the liquid or the alcohol would evaporate next, and then usually the densest stuff doesn't evaporate, but everything sort of evaporates in different stages. So it's kind of like a separation process again. And then as it rises, it'll cool, and then it'll recondense. But when it's in its vapor state in alchemy, they say now it's receptive to the subtle influences coming in from above, to higher consciousness, to spiritual energy. And so you can infuse it when it's in that vapor state. You can infuse it with this higher vibrational energy. And then as it recondenses, when it cools, it recondenses, it now takes that higher vibrational energy and it brings it back into the physical. And it comes.
So it like one of the earlier stages, it was an integration, the conjunction, I think is what you called it. This is a whole different type of integration. It's with the higher frequency, aspects, bringing it into the whole again.
So we're really in this phase, you're really trying to like merge heaven and earth. You're sort of ascending to this higher vibrational state, or maybe we could say for personal work, we could say we're ascending to a higher vibrational, higher consciousness state, and we get into that kind of bliss state. And then at some point you come back down from that state, and you take whatever wisdom or illumination that you've received, and now you come to embody it and apply it in your life.
Right.
And
so can you give us a physical example, like in a lab? What purpose does the distillation process serve in that way? Most
of your essential oils, like the high therapeutic grade essential oils, for example, are based on distillation processes. So you're really trying to extract out the essential oils, but the more rounds you go through distillation, the more pure and therapeutic and high potency those oils become.
Interesting.
So a lot of extraction processes are going to use distillation as a method. But then in alchemy, they used to go through 7 rounds of this. So they would separate out the different essentials again through the distillation, and then they take each of those 3 separate essentials, and then they take them through another round of distillation and another round of distillation, another round. And they would do it like 7 times. It takes a lot of patience. And so that was one of those parts where, the real spiritual energy can be infused into it, but it takes time, it takes patience. And in terms of when science started thinking just in terms of chemistry, that's where they thought, well, what's the point of all of this? It's the same chemistry, but it wasn't really matching the bottom line. So they started to reduce how many times they might distill. And they stopped using it with Reiki energy or spiritual energy or consciousness or chants. So the spiritual became divorced at that part when they then started making their pharmaceutical remedies and so forth. So for us, though, it's about, raising, really developing a spiritual practice, and whether it's meditation or some form of ceremonial process or whatever, yoga, some form of spiritual practice on a regular basis where you're raising your consciousness up to these higher divine realms, where you're really connecting into that oneness of all, and that light and that beauty, and you're receiving wisdom from it. You're not just blissing out, you're receiving wisdom and insight from it. And then you come back down into your everyday consciousness. And now we need to integrate that, embody that, and apply that.
Yes. And I think that that repeated integration, again, I think of it as integration, is such an essential part for not only changing our lives, but changing our world. And I think that people often focus on that bliss connection, like without really fully integrating it into their daily lives.
Right. And so when you really, really are connecting to those higher states of consciousness, the primary desire that fills you is, it should be to serve, to help make this world a better place, right? So not just bliss out for myself, but to realize I can make a difference in this world, and the whole world needs to start feeling this and recognizing that this connection is possible for all of us. And so, if we look at our current social situation right now with the pandemic and everything, our whole, you can already start to see all of these stages showing up just within this one circumstance. And our whole world's been turned upside down, and we're having to, go into the isolation process, which is, I feel, the fermentation stage. And
let's start at the very beginning, because I think that what's been leading up to this is very pertinent. So I know that we still need to talk about the red phase, that final phase, but let's talk about the socially and physically what's going on in our world right now. From like the black phase
beginning. So you can look at cycles within cycles. So like in my book on the Game Changer Social Alchemist, that I go all the way back to like the late 90s, and I show how those stages, 7 stages, are aligning with what we're going through in terms of a transformation, a larger transformational cycle that's happening within the human collective, especially since around the new millennium, and what it's driving us towards, where we keep getting stuck and so forth. But if we just look at the current situation, we can see a smaller cycle within the bigger cycle. So when the COVID stuff, and there's, potential for pandemic and so forth, and the fear and all of that disruption that came, the panic that came, the fear that came, the rapid change of our way of life came. That was a calcination process without it. So that was the first stage, where everything was just so shocking and upsetting. And then from that, people started going into either panic, fear, or denial, and then grief. And, so all these emotions started surfacing in people. And at first I didn't believe it, but then it started to set in, but then there's confusion, and then there's anger, and then there's, the fear, and some people went too far with it. And then whatever that pulls up for us from a subconscious level, we all have our own personal fears and attachments. And what is it? Some people got desperate and despair, or hopelessness. You've had a rise in depression. You've had a rise in, drug abuse, alcoholism, violence, at home, and so forth. So all of this is a result of what's stirred up from the subconscious. That's the disillusion phase. And then as we start to try and sift through the data, right? So what, and there's still a lot of confusion around it, but there's at least more data now we can start to look to of, okay, what's working, what's not working, what's gone overboard, and are we getting to the other side of this? When might we get to the other side of it? What's our plan for how to go back into life? What will it look like?
And what's the truth? It's on some level, it's trying to identify what's truth, what's so-called fake news, what's sort of like a mistaken perspective. It really is trying to identify the essential pieces.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's still murky, so we're kind of in that process still between, for this current cycle, in that process between the separation and the settling down of the murkiness and everything clarifying. So we're still trying to separate out those pieces. And then I think that, once we do, it's okay, now what does our new way of life look like? So as we come into the conjunction phase, it's like, what is life going to look like as we emerge from, this upsetting time? And it's going to be different. So, we can look to, and I've had a number of video blogs I've been doing about this. It's like, what is it that we want to take out of this? It's really working, right? So there's some things you can look at, like, okay, more personal responsibility, my actions affect everybody else. Whether I'm cleaning enough, whether if I'm sick and having symptoms, I should isolate and not be exposing other people. So my actions affect everybody else. So that awareness alone is golden, because it's true all the time. We're just now becoming really conscious of it. And then cleanliness, like we have to be more mindful of washing our hands, cleaning our surfaces, not touching our face, right? So all of the hygiene stuff, that's really important stuff, because our world's very dirty, and we don't seem to be caring most of the time, but now we have to start caring. Recognition of more people reaching out their hearts to their neighbors. Oh, my neighbors are elderly, maybe they shouldn't be going out, I can do something for them, right? So there's more individuals who are reaching out in compassion and neighborly good love, and goodwill. So there's some really good things coming out of this, and we need to recognize, okay, what are those parts that we need to keep as we move forward in our society, and they need to become a way of life, not just during this 2-month period of staying at home. They need to become a way of life, because we're not out of the clear yet. There's still impurities. The virus, they're still saying the virus is, going to be around for another couple of years. So we need to make a way of life out of this.
Right.
So this
and
is
one
really
of
change.
Sorry. Well, one of the things that has become clear to me is that we are both, community-based and globally based. The local and global communities both matter, and they matter in different ways. And it's a sort of thing where perhaps it's been a mistake to make so much global and not have enough within our community. I think in terms of just food production, how, and even like the healthcare protection,
the
manufacturing, like getting it all from China, which is where the pandemic started. Not such a great idea, So if we can think about collaborating on a local level as well as a global level, then that sort of shifts our focus and shifts our responsibility and makes us feel like, oh, the local is really very important too.
Yeah, it's like the pendulum swing. We went way too far to this globalization, and then all of a sudden that got cut off, and we're realizing, okay, that doesn't work. And so now we need to find the balance point. So I think it's about local self-sufficiency and sustainability, but global connectivity at the same time.
Absolutely.
And I think we're also realizing, though, that humans are not meant to live in isolation from each other. Even though we can do this internet stuff and Zoom, and thank God for technology right now, we still crave and need in-person contact, and we need community. We need to feel loved. We need to feel touched, and for our mental and emotional health and well-being, we need that connectivity. So I think people are going to value it a lot more.
We need nature too. I think about the hot spots, such as New York City, where there's such crowdedness, in jails where there's both crowdedness and lack of nature, in nursing homes where there's this isolation, and with the, generally speaking, not that same kind of connection to nature. It's like we humans, I don't think are meant to live like that.
Yeah. So in alchemy, we would say we need a balance of the 4 elements: earth, water, air, fire. And so connection to nature is one of those ways to get it. We can get it in other ways. We can create it within our homes, but it takes mindfulness and awareness to do that, right? Feng Shui is a great practice. Greening up your home is a great practice. So there's a lot of ways we can do that. But nature, we need to live in alignment with nature, not separate from nature. And that would very much be an alchemical process. Is like, we want to know what the flow and rhythm and laws of nature are, so that we can be aligned with it and harness it. And yet maybe we can also take it further, because we can bring our creative abilities and our technology to work with those principles rather than just separate from those principles.
And I think about the crowded areas. If we are living in high density, we also need to have plenty of really good parks, and perhaps some of the vertical farming, so that there is the sustainability for the city.
I really felt that, because I live in LA, and it's like concrete city, and there's not enough parks, and there's the beach, but it's just not the same. And I decided I'm going to get out of LA during this time, because I don't want to be stuck in that.
Right.
Nature and
I
green
get that. This hour is flying by, and I do want to talk about the red phase. But before we get into that, I want to make sure our listeners and viewers know how to connect with you and to find out what's coming up on your schedule.
Yeah, so they can go to my website, theresabullard.com. And also mysteryteachings.com is about the series that I have on Gaia. It's currently in its 3rd season, and we're
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we're about to, so all the first 3 seasons are available on Gaia now, TV, and then we're about to start filming for season 4. So that's an ongoing thing. And then, most of the work that I have done in the last number of years has been in-person teaching and healing modalities and activations and trainings, and I travel all over the world doing it. And all of that came to a screeching halt for the last couple months. So all of my schedule has been a little thrown up in the air. It's hard to kind of know exactly when we can move forward, but I'm hoping by, in July and August, September onwards that we'll be able to run some things again. So I have plans, for Winnipeg and Minneapolis and hopefully Estonia and the UK and also Los Angeles. And so from July onwards, and they can just watch my schedule on my website to get a sense of that.
Do you do online programs?
I do have one online program where it's called the Quantum Transformation Formula. It's really about helping us do exactly what I was just talking about, which is that distillation process of raising our consciousness up to a higher level. I talk about accessing the quantum realm for all of those new ideas that coming in from higher level of consciousness, the one mind, the universal mind, and then bringing those down through the various levels of our mind from brainstorming and visioning to planning to really doing the law of attraction kind of stuff where but there is more than the law of attraction. It's the full formula that's based on the alchemy, the quantum physics, and so forth. So really save people in their creative process.
Okay, so the red phase, the final step of alchemy, what is that?
Yeah, so that is a crystallization. So that is where we've been through enough of the purification and then the refinement, and we've perfected and we've raised the vibration and we've brought it to such a high vibrational state. And then you bring all those separate essentials back together again. So you rejoin them and you allow it to crystallize and form, this solid, really integral, indestructible, pure form. So it's like, that's the philosopher's stone, that's the gold, that's the the elixir of life, all those things that alchemy talks about. That is that red phase, that final place. And
so can you give us an example from the laboratory first, and then we'll talk about what that means in terms of our consciousness.
So in the laboratory, you would take the really highly potent purified essentials from the distillation phase, and then you would mix them together again in a very, very pure form of water. A lot of the alchemists actually would collect the dew because they felt that the dew was, the like manna from heaven, is like the pure water, and they collect it in these towels, and then they'd wring it out, and then they take that water through several distillation processes. So they really refine this water, and then you mix everything into that water, and then you allow the water to evaporate, and what remains is a crystal. So all the salts and the essentials and everything becomes crystallized, and it should, if you've done everything right, it should form the stone. It should form the philosopher's stone. And you will know if you've got it if you pick it up and you try to scratch a piece off of it, and it's not like it's indestructible. You can't, it's really solid crystal. And if it falls apart, well, then that means that there was something in the process building up to that you kind of missed, and there's still impurities, and you kind of have to start from scratch again. So what
does this mean for us as individuals and collectively?
So getting to that final stage is, I would say that is what humanity as a whole is being pushed towards. We are being pushed to become a new human, to become a more evolved, enlightened human. And in the Kabbalistic tradition, we talk about something called the Adam Kadmon, which is the perfecter, godlike human. And that
it's like the next, it's a blueprint of our next stage of evolution.
Yeah, a lot of our superhero characters or X-Men, like that idea is being depicted through some of those movies. So you're becoming this, like superhuman, godlike, and we have that capacity within us. So it's for us at a very physical level. I would say we're using more of our DNA capacity. Right now, we're like maybe 3 to 5%, and we would be using a lot more of it to actively awaken, latent gifts. We would be using more of our brain capacity for conscious awareness, not just subconscious and unconscious, but we would be more opening up our perception and seeing all the different energies around us. So we would be realizing that we can control the quantum realm, kind of like Neo in the Matrix, and we would be able to control things. So it's an evolutionary leap, and we have a lot more to go before we get there, but we are on track for it.
And I think what's so exciting when viewing the social, the physical, the economic, the lifestyle changes underway right now, when you look at it within this context of alchemy, it can give us hope for creating something far better, and knowing that we need to let go of things and go through some difficult cycles in order to get there. And I'm so grateful that you have taken your scientific background and connected that with the spiritual realm in a way that is very meaningful in our human existence. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you, Theresa, for joining us here today.
Thank you, Christine. It was great, very fast paced, but I hope it's useful for people to see some light in this challenging time.
And I want to thank you for joining us here today. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you'd like to empower yourself to step further into your vibration of change, please visit my website at christineupchurch.com, where you can learn more about my insights, upcoming events, and private sessions.